Something I find really interesting is despite the fact that society is getting more sexually open in a lot of ways, be it with just in degenerate behavior, hookup culture, kind of the promotion of casual sex on TV and movies and all that kind of stuff. While all this stuff is like becoming more and more prominent, there is this very strong kind of puritanical countercurrent to it. And it's not coming from people like me, unfortunately. It's mainly coming from feminists. So this has taken a bunch of different forms, most notably Me Too. But we're not going to talk about Me Too today. We're going to talk about something that predates Me Too. And it's something I just find interesting how prevalent it is. And this is the obsession with age gaps in relationships. And before everyone, ironically enough, the fact I say this, there's probably going to be like 50 people like, Argent, you're a pedo supporter. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about between like two adults. Like there's this really weird thing that's emerged where if you have a relationship with someone who's significantly younger than yourself, they call that pedophilia. Like for example, and I'm sorry to bring this up, but like with Darkside Phil, people called him a pedophile for a long time because his girlfriend was 10 years younger than him. I forget the exact age that Leanna was when they started going out, if she was 18 or 19, but he was in his late 20s. I think he was like 29 or something when they started going out. And people called him a pedo, and people said that that was immoral and wrong. And it's just like, huh? It's, if anything, like as I've said, that's kind of something I looked up to him for having a girlfriend a lot younger than himself. It's really weird, this anger towards it. And if you notice, like whenever older males marry younger women, people often get really angry about that. I don't think specifically with Michael Douglas and Catherine Zeta-Jones, people got that angry about that. But a lot of the time, if someone marries a woman a lot younger than themselves, people get really triggered by that and really upset by that. And I just find this is a growing thing, and it's really becoming a hysteria. I know in particular, kind of just to sidestep for a minute, there's this whole thing where if you admit that you think a teenage girl is attractive, that makes you a pedo. And I'm going to probably get in trouble for even saying this, but a lot of people have really gotten trashed for saying, oh, that 16-year-old girl is attractive. Or like not even that they'd have sex with her if they had a chance, but just that they think she's attractive, and people will call them a pedophile. And in some cases it'll be, it's very arbitrary. It'll be like, oh, you're going out with this girl who looks like she's older, but you find out that she's actually not 19, she's 18, and that makes you a pedophile, even though everything else is exactly the same. And the thing is, the age of consent laws, at least in my view, aren't there to determine when someone is sexually mature. People mature at different ages. Some people go through puberty very early. Some people go through it much later. Some people have fully developed when they're like in their mid-teens. Like I know I used to work at a movie theater taking tickets, and it's very hard to tell the difference often in girls between the age of like 14 and their mid-20s. Just because if they've gone through puberty, they just look the same as they will as an adult. The age of consent laws are there, in my opinion, because even if someone's physically mature, it's to ensure that everybody, before they get married or enter into relationships with someone older or something, is emotionally mature enough. That they fully developed emotionally and mentally, and they're kind of in a position where they can make those decisions for themselves. And I agree with that. I think age of consent laws are a good idea. I like that there's an exception if they're both under the same age. But at the same time, to say that somebody's attracted to a girl who's one day under the age of consent, to say that they're a pedophile is crazy. And I find that this thing has become increasingly just common, and it's become a hysteria. I don't know if it's just because there's more like pedophiles than there used to be. I don't know if it's because of all the child porn on the internet, but it's just kind of become a hysteria. And once again, I know people are going to say, Argent, you're defending pedos. I hate pedos more than just about anybody else. I think that they should be burned alive, and that should be the punishment for touching kids. But my point is, like, the definition of a pedo is someone who's attracted to a prepubescent boy or girl. not somebody who's gone through puberty and looks like an adult, just happens to be under the age of consent. But like I said, with DSP, him pursuing a girl who's like 18 years old, people called him a pedo and people called her his child slave. And I know people have attacked Jim, Mr. Medicare, because his girlfriend's like 10 years younger than him. He's like in his late 30s and his girlfriend's like in her early 20s. And people have called him a pedo and people have criticized him for it. And I'm like, that's not pedo, that's Chad. like it's not like, once again, it's not that the girl's underage. The girl is a couple of years above the age of consent. It's that there's this just hatred of this age difference. And I just find it really interesting. So if you want to hear kind of my theory as to what it is. Okay, so I think it is feminism to a large extent. I think there is an issue with maybe child pornography and all that filth being more accessible than in previous generations. But I think a lot of it comes from feminism. You see, the difference between men and women in terms of their value, marriageable value, is male marriageable value doesn't really go down over time. If anything, it tends to increase up, I don't know, to your 40s or so. Whereas a woman's marriageable value steadily declines after her 20s. And even older men, like in their 50s and 60s, have more marriageable value than a woman does at that point in her life. That's because males remain at least somewhat fertile till the end of their lives. Obviously, it declines after a certain point, but men can still have children in their 60s and 70s. It's not unheard of. Also, the risk of birth defects increases somewhat for men. So, like if you have a really old man who's having children, there's some risk that they'll have birth defects, but it's much, much, much lower than a woman who's like in her 40s trying to have children and them having birth defects. The other thing is just the things that men look for in a woman and things that women look for in a man are different. Women are often looking for a man has some sort of prestige, has some confidence, is economically secure. So somebody in their 40s who's like a doctor or a lawyer and has like a big house, etc., they're going to be very attractive to a woman in her 20s. Sure, they aren't as maybe good looking as Chad down the street, but they're financially secure and they know that they can provide a good living for them and their children. And so they're inherently attracted to that. Whereas if you have the inverse scenario, most 20-year-old guys are not going to be interested in like a 60-year-old woman. I know there's the whole cougar thing, but outside of like okay looking middle-aged women who they might have a fling with, unless you're Emmanuel Macron, it's just not something men really aspire to. Like I can see a lot of women wanting like a boyfriend or a husband who's 10 years older, is a lot more wealthy and will kind of take care of them. Whereas the idea of that for males, unless once again you're Prince Harry or Emmanuel Macron, is just not something they aspire to the same degree. So my point being that if men choose not to get married until a bit later in life, it's not really a big deal for them. Maybe it would be better if they got married in their 20s. But if they get married in their late 30s to someone younger than them, then that's fairly kind of natural. The issue is with women is if they don't get married by a certain point, then their value just kind of dramatically drops in terms of that. So that being said, if a woman gets married at a younger age, in particular if they have children, then their value doesn't decrease. They normally get to stay with the male. They get to keep being provided for. They keep being wanted by the man, even though they aren't young and fertile necessarily anymore. So how are we kind of putting this together? I think this whole age gap thing is largely put forward by feminists who are like middle-aged and can't have children anymore and never got married because they hate men. And it's them realizing that their lives were like a complete waste, or that they just can't have random sex anymore like they used to because all the guys aren't looking at them anymore. They're looking at the 20-year-old, the fertile 20-year-old. And I think it makes them immensely jealous. And I think it makes them I kind of recognize the flaws in their thinking. And that dose of reality that that either, even if they are married, because of no fault divorce and the fact that most of them are just really insufferable, means that their husband could just leave them for some younger woman who will treat him better. And I think they're terrified of that. I think that's something they're very scared of. And to a certain extent, this is their attempt at a self-defense measure, just imposing this hysteria. Now, once again, am I saying that these are necessarily good things, like to have a 40-year-old marrying a 20-year-old? No, I think it's better if the two people are close to the same age. That's not really my point. I hope people don't take it away. I'm saying that that's the ideal. No, ideally they should be about the same age. Maybe the male being a couple years older. But even if the woman's like 2 or 3 years older, who cares? It doesn't really matter. The issue is more that I think, naturally speaking, it's more natural for the woman to be significantly younger than the male, than vice versa, just because of how the psychology of both sexes work and how reproductive systems work. So it's just kind of an interesting case, and yeah, I hope that kind of made sense. Just keep an eye out for it, because it is a very, I find, interesting and prevalent thing that you might not think about at first glance.